But I do want to have a little bit of an introduction about your merging of being a musician and how your original interest in becoming a musician blended with the realities of the world and what role you wanted to play as another citizen in the world trying to make it a better place.
I grew up playing music. My parents are both classical musicians, so I was raised on music, on classical music, and then at the age of 12, I went to a summer camp in Western Massachusetts called Row Camp, which was run by a Unitarian minister who was also an anti-nuclear activist. And that's where I first heard around a campfire a guy named Al Giordano, who later went on to be a journalist and run Narco News and other things. And that's where I first was exposed directly in person to somebody writing what we could call a protest song, and seeing what kind of impact it had on people. I mean, it was just obviously really powerful. It was immediate. I could see, like, well, this is communication. Now we're communicating. This is real communication. He's explaining what's going on and doing it in a way that's totally emotionally accessible, and he's changing people's whole perspective right now in the course of 3 minutes. And I'm like watching that happen around this campfire. And that hooked me. I was hooked from then on. It's not like I decided at the age of 12, this is what I'm going to do with my life, but it was definitely an immediate, like, wow, this is impressive. This works. I like this. Yeah.
So did you decide that you wanted to be a musician and then this activist aspect came into it, or was it always the two together?
It was more kind of like two streams that kind of met and sort of intersected at various points and then joined each other and became inextricably linked and sort of into one stream basically. And but it definitely started out as sort of two interests that were independent of each other, but that I kind of always realized had connections with each other, but they weren't necessarily joined initially. I mean, really, I got into playing music on my own, like not classical music, but playing guitar and stuff like that, really just to have something small I could carry around when I took acid in the woods. I mean, I did a lot of acid as a teenager, and you couldn't carry a cello around with you, and so I got a little half-size guitar, and eventually accidentally got pretty good at it, in the course of exploring my mind and Taoist philosophy, and then the whole sort of getting political. Yeah, was something that happened to me a bit later in life, like around the age of 19. I mean, I had already been exposed to all kinds of activism and politics and stuff, but I got very much sidelined by being a born-again hippie, and of a certain kind of hippie that rejected political activism actually for 8 years of my life. Wow. It was really, I went in a very different direction, influenced by certain other people that, coming out of that scene. I mean, if you know a lot of people who were hippies during the original era of hippiedom, then it's not an entirely unfamiliar concept. The folks who were, tune in, drop out, move back to the land, don't feed the beast, don't be involved with political activism or anything, that just drop out, that was, a lot of people actually thought that was going to change the world. So they were activists. It was an activist orientation, but of a certain kind. It didn't involve going to protests. I mean, for a certain kind of crowd, that was where I was at. I wasn't very good at being a tune in, turn on, drop out hippie, because I still did go to a few protests as a teenager. So, but I got much more into it by the age of 19 or so. I moved to the Bay Area and met serious radicals for the first time, really, as an adult anyway, that I could really talk to and get a picture of what this was all about. And I was certainly attracted to the whole idea in the first place, which is probably what led me to go to the Bay Area in the first place. Although if you're into, LSD and psychedelic music, then the Bay Area is also the obvious place to go. But so I probably went there more for that, more because the Grateful Dead lived there than for any other reason. But once I got there, I met all sorts of radicals, from the 60s, you could say. Hello.
This is Ash. He's going to be with us in this interview, I think.
Oh yeah. He knows where the camera is. He knows where the attention is. Where is Papa's attention? His eyes are going that way. I'll stand there.
So, I've followed you and your music for decades. I first heard about you when your music was used frequently during the breaks of Democracy Now! I think that's how a lot of us here in California experienced you, because we have Pacifica in Los Angeles and the Bay Area. And your music struck me as being of the Phil Oakes school, in being unrelenting in expressing the strength of your convictions and your outrage at the horrors that are going on, that are being waged by a certain class of people in society and the world. And yet, along with people that I've run into who are totally movement people, but also fully professional musicians like Jim Page, Casey Neal, and Dana Lyons, that you're kind of a new generation. You're not just interested in folk music and the folk music tradition. I mean, one of your songs that we're going to hear seems to have some Afro beat in it. And I know that, I think one of these guys said to me once, we listened to Led Zeppelin and Rush and Pink Floyd. And so, we're playing an acoustic guitar, but some of the rock and roll and even punk rock comes into our acoustic music. So can you talk a little bit about, what you're trying to accomplish musically, instrumentally, and in terms of your songcraft regarding musical traditions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big juicy subject there, and I am a huge fan of and friend of Jim and Dana and Casey, to take three spectacular examples of great songwriters. And I would have to say, not to speak for them, but I can speak for them in saying that they all reject genre just as I do. And I'd say that all of us are very influenced by all sorts of different musical traditions. Jim has been tremendously influenced by all sorts of rock and roll, and you could, anytime somebody plays Dana, tremendously influenced by mariachi music, the country music. Casey certainly has a massive punk rock influence. All of them, are basically guys playing acoustic guitars, and so, we tend to characterize guys with acoustic guitars as playing some kind of folk music, but that's just that's just our culture, how it does that. And it's the music industry too, and the way it kind of created genres for things, and it decided in the early 60s that if it's a white guy with an acoustic guitar, then they're folk music, but I think there's at the same time as all of us reject genre and are tremendously influenced by all sorts of other music, in my case certainly including Afrobeat, we're also all very much coming out of the folk tradition as well. And all of us are tremendously influenced by artists like Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, hugely, all of us for sure. And I am too. And I don't know if I'm, more like Phil Oakes than any of those as far as my songwriting style. That might be true. I wouldn't say that makes me more folky, but it could be true. I think I I tend to write sort of overtly, specifically topical songs a bit more than any of them do. And they're all, another way to put that is all of them do metaphor better than I do. I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it.
Well, I also think about Howard Zinn when I listen to your music. And you seem to have an extremely deep, passionate desire to tell history stories in a modern context. You won't just there are some of your songs where you just like tell the historical situation, but often you bring them together with what's going on now and situations now. So you seem to see history as I do, as a really important tool for straightening out the national dialogues on what's going on in reality. Have you had this passion for history? And that's where I would compare you to Phil Oakes when he talks about, Dominican Republic and things like that. You're educating people about things often that they knew nothing about, and often about situations around the world and groups of people in struggle that most of us know nothing about. Is that like your cause?
Yeah.
Amplify that for people?
I mean, I just think that history is just such an incredible source of knowledge. I mean, it's such an incredible source of knowledge about history, obviously, but every one of those, so many of those stories from history have so much bearing on the present day, and there's so much to learn from history about the present day, and that's a statement made by people who are fans of history probably far too often, and it sounds really trite, but it's completely true. If we don't know history, we are just walking around in a three-dimensional world, and we're completely lacking that fourth dimension, and that fourth dimension of time is absolutely vital. This world has been around for a while, and things have happened, and if all we know about what's happened is what we heard from our friends or maybe our parents or what we read on the news, then we're just that's an incredibly limited perspective on what, compared to what you could have if you actually read some history. I mean, that I've learned so much from just friends, about what happened during the parts of the 20th century that I wasn't around for. But, I don't know anybody who I never have known anybody who I could talk about the 19 teens with. They were all dead, before I ever had an interest in the 19 teens. I've known lots of people I could talk about the 1930s with who are now all dead. But, I never knew anybody I could talk about the 19 teens with. And I certainly have never known anybody I could talk about the 19th century with. But the 19th century was at least as exciting as the 20th century in terms of history. I mean, it's amazing, an amazing century, that behooves people to know a lot about, and when you mentioned Jim Page and Dana Lyons, for taking two particular examples, I mean, Jim Page's songs like Heroes and Survivors, and Dana Lyons' songs like Turn of the Wrench. I mean, for me, that was like some of the most spectacular, learning about historical events. I mean, in the case of Turn of the Wrench, only very recent history. It just happened when I first heard the song, only a few years earlier. But it's still history, and it was a hidden history. It was something you never would hear about, other than unless you heard his song or you happened to live in Minnesota in the 80s. You would never have known about the bolt weevils that he wrote that song about, and certainly. I did know about the Choctaw famine, but prior to hearing Jim's song about it. But I mean, that song, among so many others he's written, are just such great examples of this whole tradition of telling a story from history in a way that really, really viscerally brings it alive, and brings it alive in an emotional way. Like, it's the closest you can get to being there, I think, is when it comes to history, is to hear a song about it. And then you can get a lot more information from books, but to really kind of transport yourself into the what hopefully might be the mind frame of people that were there. I think a song is the most potent form of communication and storytelling.
Well, you pay tribute to the people you sing about, and they deserve that kind of tribute. You also turn them into human stories. You're not just reading about some characters in a textbook. You're telling a story as if you're talking about people in Gaza right now and what this particular family is dealing with. And that is so moving, David. You have a real gift with that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the human how you respond to the human scale of all these crises, as well as understanding the economic theory behind it and militarism, imperialism, and class war and all that kind of stuff. Your songs aren't. I've never heard any of your songs talk about that stuff too much.
Right. I think it's best to avoid, actually sharing your actual opinions or feelings or thoughts on any of those, on anything actually in a song. And that's the great power of all the great storytellers. And you just look at any of the best songs written by any of these people we've been talking about, including my songs, and what they all have in common, that what's so moving about a song like Heroes and Survivors, or a song like Phil Oakes's The Thresher, or any number of others, is that they're just telling a story. And they're not actually you definitely get the impression of this person has some feelings about this story, what gives the audience the power, the ability to really hear the story and really process it and make sense of it and feel, what it feels like, and really, for the words to go straight to the emotional centers of the brains of the audience, and work its magic. The way that happens is the storyteller does not tell us what they think or what they feel. They just tell the story. And then you can infer all sorts of stuff from the story. Of course, so much you can infer from the story, especially if you have some kind of idea of you read more on the historical context that the song is written about. Then there's a whole lot more you can learn about it and infer from it and all that. But basically, the story is just the story. It tells a story, and that's all it does. And so it may be that by the end of the song, all that people know is this thing happened, but what they get from the song is the feeling about why this matters. And the reason they get that is because the story is being told in a song, and the songwriter is not telling them what to think or what to feel. Because if you tell them what you think or what you feel, that translates for an audience as you're telling them what to think or what to feel. And that's why people have a negative association with political songwriting for the most part, because most political songwriters, especially when they're starting out, make the terrible mistake of telling us what they think or what they feel. And by doing that, they kill the song and they make it useless and ineffective. So, so much kind of, I don't know, there's so many different genres where this can happen, but you can think of any, whether it's a punk rock or the more in the folk scene, but anybody who it comes across as preachy. People use the term preachy, and they mean that in a very negative way. And this is just basically, it feels preachy if people are telling you what they think or what they feel, because they're telling you what to think and what to feel, and they're not letting you think or feel for yourself, which is what happens when you just tell the story. And I assume that all the other songwriters who are really good at this already have come to this conclusion and realized that's what's working, is that they're just telling the story. I don't know, because I haven't heard, it's not like there's a textbook that I know of where they say, like, if you want to be a good songwriter, don't tell us what to think or what to feel, but just tell the story. But you can see that people like Jim Page, has realized that a long time ago. I learned it from him. I mean, not that he ever said that, but I learned it from his songwriting.
Sure. Well, you mean rather instead of don't tell, show, or something like that?
Yeah, just tell the story. Like, you could just take any of my songs that is about a historical event and look at the lyrics and try to find any adjectives. I mean, you'll find very few of them. I'm just describing what happened. Of course, what happened is it's if you actually tell people what they should think of this, Well, I mean, then you run the risk of doing what Woody Guthrie did in a lot of his songs, which is like write this concluding last verse. And many of his songs are best without the concluding last verse, I would say, actually, as much as I love his songwriting, because it's that last verse that gets preachy, where you're telling people, okay, and now you should join the union. Like, okay, everybody hearing about this massacre of union miners, they already want to join the union. At the end of that, they already understand the value of the union and why they were making war against you don't need to tell them, and now you should go join the union. That's taking it a little too far. And there's a lot of songwriters, I think, who do a better job than that, because they figured that out. And Jim Page is certainly one of them. You just don't need to wrap things up with this neat little conclusion. Just tell the story. And if you do tell the story of any one of these, massacres or uprisings or union struggles or mine disasters or wars or whatever it is you're talking about, these are such powerful, iconic stories that there's absolutely no need to embellish them with extra adjectives. That just detracts from them.
Well, we live in a mediated culture, and I think one of the reasons people on the left and liberals and independents and conservatives are failing to run this democracy is because we've all crossed a threshold where too many people are spending too much time in mediated reality, so that they lose touch with what's going on in everyday consensus reality. And people, when they're our age, who are like 20s now, they're going to look back on the people who they spent their lives with day to day, and they're going to be people like Taylor Swift. Daily tweets from these people. They followed all these little incidents that went through the entire life of these people that they never actually know, and yet they don't really know much about anybody on their block. And with your music, I feel like after I've heard a song that you've been hanging out with me, just chatting about some of your friends in another part of the world or another point in time. And it's not about the superstars. Even when you talk about John Brown, I mean, the whole thing is, it's not about the Ralph Naders, the Bernie Sanders, the AOCs. It's about people in a kitchen sitting down and talking about how fucked up something is, and we're going to do something. What do we do? And then you give them a bunch of tools from history and from what people are doing around the world. And I think that's why culture is so important to me now. I think we have to take our culture back, as Jim Page sings.
Yeah.
And we have to change the national dialogue about these things before we can actually take power, because people are so confused. Yesterday on the BBC, I heard one of these fascist diplomats that are on MSNBC all the time talking about Putin meeting with Trump, and says, well, he said Putin wanted to talk about the roots of the problem. What kind of person is that? And it's like, really? You can disparage looking at the roots of a problem. Like, that's ridiculous. And so you're sort of the anti-force to that.
Yeah, that's what I try to do, and talk about how these things got started, and tell the stories that are important about that, relevant to that. I have written about the Ukraine situation as well. I wrote a song called "It's Not a Trade War," which is, of course, they claim it's all about morality and whatever nonsense, but it is a trade war. And as are the wars that the U.S. always engages in, they're all trade wars. And trade wars are historically very, very violent. The term trade war as a sort of a economic thing that doesn't involve the military is a recent term. Traditionally the term trade war. I mean, the first trade war was the Opium Wars, when Britain and the United States and France and Russia all invaded China. In order to force the Chinese government to accept the import of a massively addictive drug, opium, which then led to a century of huge numbers of people being addicted to opium in China, and what they call in China the 2 centuries of subjugation, or I can't remember what the term is they use, but something like that. And it's people people know the history, and you can learn it in a few minutes. Sometimes the really salient bits that you need to know, like, I mean, just talking about the trade war, the opium wars. I wrote a song about that called Trade War. I mean, it's just you just describe, but you don't need to say what you think of it. I mean, the British invaded China, killed 20,000 people, completely destroyed 2 cities. And in response to the Chinese government ordering their military to burn 20,000 crates of opium that had been illegally exported to their country. And, you just tell that story, and also just number 20,000 crates of opium. I mean, you get some kind of an idea of just what kind of project the British imperialists were engaged in here, turning Indian agriculture into poppy cultivation and then sending those poppies to get China addicted to opium. I mean, what an evil empire. Talk about evil empires. And the British, my goodness. There's nothing evil that they haven't done to China, let alone to Ireland and any number of other places.
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, these stories, you tell the story, and then it's it's a powerful. It can be the most powerful 2 or 3 minutes that, I mean, people have revelations, because of hearing a song. You talk to people in the Western world who didn't grow up in a refugee camp where, that you kind of automatically become an activist in a way, if you're like born Palestinian or something. But if you're born French or American or British or German, it's quite likely not your circumstances in life that turned you into a radical. It's not growing up in a comfortable suburb and eating 3 good meals a day. That doesn't turn you into a radical. If that's your background, then what does potentially turn you into a radical is music. And if you talk to, of course, books can do it, lots of things can do it, but you just try talking to radicals from the United States, Britain, France, Germany, places like that, wealthy countries. Talk to these people. How did they become radicals? Most of the time, or at least half the time, by my experience, and it may be that I have a biased, view given my situation in life, but half the people I talked to, it was music. It was either folk music, hip hop, or punk rock that did it to them.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the different genres that you guys pull into your music, you can do something that the early folkies couldn't do with just their acoustic guitar. Someone like Pete Seeger would be on the stage and he'd be very polite and challenging in his rhetoric a little bit, but he'd be playing basically a nice little pop tune. Well, what you guys can do, and maybe this is the Led Zeppelin influence, but you can create musical soundscapes that evoke sensations, feelings, disorientation, that embellish what you put into your lyrics, like in this first song, As the Bombs Rain Down. That's how we start this. You are going to go into David Rovics' music, and we're talking about the bombs raining down. Tell me about that song a little bit.
As the Bombs Rain Down was the first of the songs that I wrote about the ongoing Israeli genocide of the people of Gaza that began basically the day after October 7th, 2023. And I have now written 64 songs on that subject. And As the Bombs Rain Down was, since October 23, I've written 64 songs about Gaza. And the first one I wrote was As the Bombs Rain Down. And that particular recording of it, that the video comes from, was actually the second sort of studio recording of the song that I made, which was in February last year. I spent much of the month in France with a bunch of wonderful musicians from all over Scotland, France, the U.S., Australia, and making an album, and that was one of the tracks from the album, which is very much just about reality in Gaza at the time, and which has not changed since then, other than getting worse.
So who are you playing with, and where did you shoot this? It looks like it's in an attic or a bedroom or something that's been converted into a studio or a jam pad.
Yeah, we spent, we actually rented a house in France near Toulouse where the French musicians we were working with all live. And and then it connected to this house, which was a 400-year-old sort of farmhouse kind of place. Beautiful place. Everything was falling apart actually, but it was still really beautiful. And the next to the house was a barn, which apparently we weren't originally necessarily supposed to be using, but I think we got permission to use the barn because the barn turned out to be like the perfect place for setting up all the recording gear where we recorded everything. So we had there were some folks filming while we were recording. So that's because the Greg Weiss, the sort of producer of the project, had intentions to make videos, in the first place. So while we were recording, he was encouraging people to, who were not involved with the recording, to keep making videos of everything.
You really don't edit in camera so much. And is that You Turkey or IU Turkey?
Yeah, U Turkey is their name. Yeah. It's a funny spelling. I don't remember the history of how they ended up with this weird band name, but yeah, U Turkey is the name of the band.
Okay, so that'll be a cut, and that's where we'll go into the video. Come on, Ash. Sit down someplace. He's on my notebook.
What's the name of it?
Oh, as the bombs rain down.
Rain down?
Yeah, as the bombs rain down. Hear the drones above your head. What were the last words that she said before she joined the thousands dead as the bombs rain down? See the fire in the sky, hear all of the children cry. The tower falls from way up high as the bombs rain down. See the dust rise everywhere, once it was a building there. Then it crashed down from the air as the bombs rain down. Twisted bodies all around, the never-ending buzzing sound. The earthquake shaking all the ground as the bombs rain down. Shattered camps of refugees, necklaces of ancient keys. Smell the burning olive trees as the bombs rain down. See the homes, apartment blocks, see the mosques reduced to rocks. Feel the awe and feel the shock as the bombs rain down. See the sewage in the streets, mixed with blood beneath your feet. Before the sonic boom repeats as the bombs rain down. See the darkness of the night, no power for the lights, but the explosions are so bright as the bombs rain down. Nothing left but rubble strewn, nothing rising but the boom. But the next one's coming soon as the bombs rain down. Hear the politicians say there's nothing here to see today. We're punishing Hamas this way as the bombs rain down. Hear the groans above your head. What were the last words that she said before she joined the thousands dead as the bombs rain down?
As the bombs rain
So you wrote a song about 1492, but it's a pretty unusual take. It's not really about Christopher Columbus discovering America. What's that all about?
I mean, the first time I heard this story, and I can't remember when, but like, I mean, I had already been a serious history buff, for probably decades. before I ever heard about this event, which is shocking because of the scale of it and because of how it turns on its head so much of the propaganda that you'll hear coming out of the so-called Christian, so-called Western world about the so-called Muslim world. I mean, the reality that we have largely written out of our historical record in terms of the minds of the vast majority of people in the West anyway, is as Christopher Columbus was leaving the Mediterranean heading towards North America, he had to take little used shipping routes to get out of the Mediterranean, because the normal shipping routes that people would normally take to leave the Mediterranean and get through wherever that strait was to get out into the open ocean, they were all clogged with the Ottoman Navy, because Sultan Bayezid II had sent the entire Ottoman Navy all across the Mediterranean from west to east to Spain to rescue somewhere between 400 and 800,000 Spanish Jews who were taken back to the Ottoman lands, to Palestine, to Turkey, what is now Turkey, to other parts of the Ottoman Empire. And in an edict the Sultan gave to all of his subjects, he said, "You should welcome these people as your own. Welcome them home." There were laws in the Ottoman Empire about who could serve in the military. You had to be Muslim to serve in the military, but it was an empire. It was a place where there was a lot of acceptance of people of different religions, ethnic backgrounds, languages, which is quite evident today, even, all over the Middle East. This is why you still have so many different ethnicities and languages and all that all over the Middle East, unlike in Europe, where there were, during the 1,000 years during which there were crusades and inquisitions and pogroms and huge, huge numbers of people killed for being of the wrong religion. By contrast, in the Ottoman Empire, they were telling everybody to live together, rescuing hundreds of thousands of Europeans from death. And, and it wasn't just that episode either. Throughout the course of hundreds of years, every year, there were thousands of Europeans fleeing Europe and heading to the Ottoman lands just for economic reasons, as well as for, safety reasons, because they could live there and farm and just be taxed once a year and actually get services for their taxes. And unlike in Europe, which was just ruled by despotic kings and, the Dark Ages, which lasted for so long, which were very dark, it's because of authoritarianism,
Yeah. Yeah, if I have my ancient history right, too, that the ancient Israelis, the ancient Jews, when the Holy Land was taken over by the Assyrians and Babylonians, that they did not put the iron fist down on them. They were actually very inclusive about them being able to continue living their lives and practicing, their cultural and religious practices. So they actually, we always think about the pogroms, which of course are important lessons and were terrible and are terrible as they continue. But there's also traditions of different cultures working together. We're not all divided by our ethnicity and religions and skin colors. That's not the history of humanity. That's just a part of it.
It's just a part of it. It does dominate much of the past 1,000 years of European history. Mass executions, mass expulsions. The Crusades, there were many of them. There were inquisitions happen in many different countries. The witch trials happened in many different countries. The pogroms happened in many different countries. Europe has been a mess for a long time, but I think it's really important to, not just to highlight the movements in Europe that have been all about solidarity and everybody getting along, and socialism. Europe was also the birthplace of socialism. But, I think it's also really important to point out that there's the rest of the world. And while there's been a lot of conflict, based around religion and ethnicity and stuff like that, that hasn't characterized life for humans around the world all the time by any means. And one really important thing people look at the Ottoman Empire, and if they know anything about the empire, they know about the Armenian genocide at the end as it was falling apart, and that was absolutely horrendous episode and genocide. The Ottoman rulers made the Kurds kill the Armenians. Horrible stuff. They killed 1.5 million Armenians. They engineered the whole idea of shoving thousands of people into a cave and then gassing them until they die. I mean, that's where Hitler got the idea from for the gas chambers. But that does not characterize Ottoman history prior to World War I. I mean, prior to them being attacked by all these Western countries and ultimately defeated, prior to that, and it was only because of that they got into this whole thing of the enemy within, and the Christians kill the Christians and all that. Before that, they weren't killing Christians. Christians were safe in the Ottoman Empire for over 1,000 years, and so were Jews. And they lived prosperous lives, neighbors with their Muslim neighbors. And there were not, the life in the Ottoman Empire was not at all characterized by conflict, just the opposite. It was characterized by people getting along. In fact, the whole Mediterranean region, for people from other parts of the world, for a very long time, there was no concept of Europe. First of all, it wasn't even a concept until very recently. It was just like there was the Mediterranean, where all the intelligent people who knew about math and writing and lived these prosperous lives and all got along. And then there was the places where things were more of a mess. As far as like the way what we call now Europeans, the way they would have looked at the world like 500 years ago. The Ottoman lands, the Mediterranean lands, that's where people lived well, and that's where civilization was. As far as and there was a lot of actual reason to say that. Because they were living more civilized lives in the Ottoman Empire compared to places like Spain, France, Germany, England, where they were engaging in these horrible crusades for hundreds and hundreds of years.
We're going to do 1 foot off to the side, 1 foot up like this. We're going to do thumbs inside the fist and on the hips. Straight back. You're going to bow, but you're going to keep your head facing.
But you want to start rolling first, I guess.
Don't it? Yeah. But anyway, up like that.
Start rolling.
And we jump.
Yep.
To put 1 foot down on it. And then you jump again, tuck it back.
In 1492, Colombo crossed the ocean. Only one of many harbors that would then be set in motion. As his men cut limbs of Arawaks and burned children at the stake, plundering a continent for God's sake. In 1492, when King Ferdinand won Granada, he passed a law known as the Edict of Alhambra. It was as the landlords wanted, as his gracious God had willed, that any Jew in Spain had 3 months to leave or else be killed. 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492, be safe up until the time they left. But Christian Europeans cut them open with their swords, searched their stomachs for gold, and dumped them overboard. And 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492, the Sultan sent his fleet to go rescue Sephardim after the Andalus defeat. Hundreds of thousands of people who knew their deaths were near were rescued by Muslims and taken to Izmir. In 1492, the Sultan said that's fine if they'd impoverish their kingdom just to enrich mine. The Sultan also passed an edict. He said, welcome home. Now treat your new neighbors as if they were your own. And 800,000 Europeans became refugees and headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. And headed east across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1492,
Hey Mac, did you see him as he came down Big Orgy? How wow, the llama low and don't know the day. Man is coming on the hill to the town and it. Now great John McLean's coming home to the Clyde. And you say, great John McLean's coming home to the Clyde. You do it. Great John McLean's coming home to the Clyde. He's coming home to the Clyde. He's coming home.
Come, what the fuck?
He's coming
Into the Clyde. Into the Clyde.
John McLean's coming. Who's John McLean?
I mean, that was, I think that could have been just the way it was mixed for the video. Was there some dancing at the end or something? Because the video, Greg's idea was to just mix in just random stuff that happened, but on the farm there. So that's not related to the song. But John McLean, and that's Lorna singing about John McLean. Lorna McKinnon was the much of the voices you'll hear on the different songs is Lorna, and she's a choir director in Glasgow as well as a leader of the Socialist Workers' Party. And she and John McLean was a socialist anti-war leader in the during World War I in Glasgow, and the Red Clydeside Rebellion of 1917, where the working class of Glasgow basically rose up and took over the city for a while. That was John McLean was one of the leaders.
Okay, and what's the whole thing with you cutting wood?
We ended up at this house first of all, I love cutting wood, and I love wood stoves, and I grew up with one in the countryside of Connecticut. And but we were not intending on cutting wood at the house. We thought it was winter, and I don't get cold much, but other people do. So we had the heat on, but that lasted for about like 3 days before the whole oil burner in the house died, and there was no heat for the rest of our time there. And so we got very familiar with the wood stove that was in the house, and found a lot of wood to chop. And also discovered that the bass player Paul is an amazing wood chopper. He clearly has grown up with wood stoves, and I would be hacking at those logs for 10 minutes or so, and he'd just take one swing, and it would be like cutting butter. It's amazing.
Wow.
I still had fun though, trying to chop myself.
We're going on to a song that I presume is a take on MAGA called Make the Planet Earth Great Again. What's the story of that one?
Yeah, so I wrote that during Trump's first presidential campaign, which of course ended up being successful, or I guess that was his first in 2015? Yeah. I got elected in 2016, and he was saying, make America great again back then too. And of course, his idea of making America great is it's a very strange one that has nothing to do with most people I know in terms of what they think would make the country great. But I thought, the make the planet Earth great again would be a nice twist on that. That's the place I'd like to make great. But also, not the way he wants to do it, though.
It's a nice anthem. And also, here you start to take on the billionaires. What do you think we need to do to make the planet Earth great again?
So, I mean, a lot of things, and I've been criticized for that song for not being that imaginative about things that we might do to make the planet Earth great again. It's pretty low-hanging fruit that I mentioned in the song, like taking the billions away from the billionaires. But that would certainly be, basically, I think capitalism is a system that is absolutely disastrous for humanity and the environment, and it's while there is some functionality to having a market for different products and services, and I wouldn't suggest that we completely get rid of markets as a sort of phenomenon but they need to be extremely heavily regulated, because you can't have a market that doesn't take into account the needs of humanity and the environment. That's crazy. So rule by the dollar has obviously been an abject total failure, and of course capitalism under billionaire rule is even that much worse. I mean, capitalism, even the textbook version of capitalism is massively problematic. But the version that we've ended up with a handful of billionaires controlling the vast majority of the world's wealth, and outright owning about half of it, and controlling the vast majority of it, and controlling so many countries. I mean, it's this. Democracy could be a nice thing, but capitalism doesn't really work with democracy very well, and certainly oligarchy doesn't work well either with democracy. So, I would say low-hanging fruit again, but certainly overthrowing capitalism and instituting an economic and political system, or systems that are oriented towards taking care of the planet and the people on it, that would be a massive step in the right direction, because it's certainly not what we got now in the United States or most other countries. We have a system that it's designed to make the rich richer and screw everybody else, while throwing them enough crumbs that they don't revolt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I'm hello. I'm heading down to meet David right now. It's the first time we're meeting in person since we played together in Prescott, Arizona at a place called The Cunning Linguist, a kind of sort of revolutionary bookstore. I think it was in 2001 maybe that I was there.
2, 3.
We could tackle the economy first, get rid of all the billionaires, set the system up so that instead of hoarding, people share, make housing, food, and healthcare basic human rights around the world for everyone is how we'd set our sights. If we could get to that point, I could say that then we could make the planet Earth great again. With human rights around the world, there'd be no refugees, no safeguarding your homeland from terrorists overseas, no need for a border wall, no jobs to protect. With a global basic income, it's simple and direct. Free trade, fair trade, same damn thing. We get to that point, then we can make the planet Earth great again. We could take on other issues, like the survival of our race, by which I mean the bipeds on this floating rock in space, the most invasive species anywhere around, the one that keeps on burning everything that can be found, the one that will get it together in the nick of time and then make the planet Earth great again. We can stop spending money on antiquated technology, such as tanks and missiles and most other things military. We can use those vast resources to make us all safe and sound. Windmills in the air, coal and oil in the ground. We can be the envy of the rest of the galaxy when we make the planet Earth great again. Make the planet Earth great again. We make the planet Earth great again.
Okay. I have it. I don't.
In natural.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than